Computer animation, an enormously successful invention that a lot of us encounter on a daily basis. We see it implemented in movies, documentaries, advertisements and a whole lot more. But how did this become so successful? What are the roots of this billion-dollar revenue production method? Well, you've come to the right place to find that out. Welcome to The History of Computer Animation in the US and a whole lot more, explained and animated by Toby Bronze on the occasion of the IB Personal Project. We begin this journey in the 1950s. While there had been previous examples of animated short films, combining it with the computer was something that had never been heard of before. The initial way animations were produced were simply by drawing everything by hand. A background will be drawn for a certain scene, and the foreground would be changed for each frame to make objects, for example a person, move, such as seen here in a short film called Steamboat Willie. That all changed by a man called John Whitney, who was often considered to be the founding father of computer animation. He created the world's first analog computer from a World War II anti-aircraft gun that could create complex drawings and photograph those with cameras at different angles. And while this wasn't necessarily created using digital technology, it certainly had computer-related elements to it, and made an impact on how computer art would develop in the next decades. It wasn't long though until a fully computer-generated image in the US started to pop up, as in 1957 another important milestone was reached. This was when the computer pioneer Russell Kirsch asked, what would happen if computers could look at pictures? And used the nation's first programming computer named the SEAC, which by the way he created himself, to feed an image of his 3-month-old son into that computer. When that turned up on the screen, it was the first computer-generated image in the US. In the 1960s, people found that computer animation could be very well used for scientific purposes as well. One of the first occasions where this was put into practice was a simulation of a 2-gyro gravity attitude system, created by a team of professors from the Bell Telephone Laboratory in 1963. It showed how a satellite would behave when it would get into orbit around Earth. Other people from the BTL also started to create animations, showing for example Newton's laws of motion and to illustrate research that they had done. The rising popularity of computer animation made the famous ICT company IBM create the IBM 2250 graphics terminal, which allowed drawing on it for easier creation of basic shapes for use in animation. Furthermore, in 1966, another computer animation pioneer, Stan van der Beek, created one of his first animated works called animated poetry. He found that regular paintings looked too static and films were too linear for poetry, so he wanted to take on a challenge to incorporate what he loved most into an ultra-modern medium, computer animation. He used a 252 by 184 pixel screen and developed a series of programs that would decide whether each pixel will be turned on or off, and for coloring those in with the desired color. And while on Stan's time a lot of people weren't exactly sure what to do with computer animation, his solution to this inspired a lot of fellow animators due to his creativity and ability to use animation for something that would at first seem completely irrational. Then, in 1972, the first computer-rendered 3D model was created by Ed Catmull, who would later be the founder of Pixar, which I will get to talk about later. The model in question was of his very own hand, and was also used in the 1976 film Future World, which was the first time ever 3D animated imagery was used in a movie. And how the hand was created was also something extremely complicated for the time. Catmull himself drew 350 polygons on his hand, after which he measured every single one of them and then imported the data into his computer, to be shown on an animation program that he had written himself. Also, the computer wasn't powerful enough to render the footage, so instead he had to photograph every frame from the computer's display and stick them together to make a moving animation. Around the same time, the first fully interactive computer system was created, aimed for more easy creation of animated sculptures, at the time all still in 2D. It was all very modern, with trackballs, keyboards and mice, all to make the workflow easier and more efficient. Also, this device could allow to move multiple shapes at once, which made for example animals and humans move very realistic. At the start of the 1980s, the previously mentioned Ed Catmull created the short film Vol Libre, which was, again, very revolutionary at the time. It incorporated the geometric implementation of real-life objects into animation of a real-world scenery, for which the skills he had learned with his hand experiment. This was, again, created completely using software made by himself and a few others. Oh, and by the way, you all know Disney? Well, they were the first major film company to incorporate computer animation into their productions, which were mostly still all drawn by hand with only little technological assistance. They used it first in The Rescuers Down Under with a software called CAPS, where they used animation software to create specific tracking shots, zoom effects and coloring. This wasn't actually done by Disney itself, but with the company that invented CAPS, which was Pixar. But now you might think, isn't Pixar actually a part of Disney? And you would be correct, but at the time that wasn't the case yet, since it was actually a part of Lucasfilm. However, that all changed in the 1990s when Walt Disney Studios acquired Pixar, which gave them all the money and resources they wanted. That allowed them to release the movie Toy Story, which was the first full film ever to be created on computers only. This release was another great milestone and truly revolutionary, as it defined the look of animated movies, even for the ones released today. And that, considering that the movie was almost blown off by Disney and fortunately saved at the last minute, because they expected it to hugely fail. Pixar also contributed a lot to the behind-the-scenes side of animation technology. Since nobody had ever created a fully animated movie before, the Pixar team had a tough time knowing what to expect when creating the movie. In fact, they had majorly underestimated the workload that it would bring along. For example, they started the creation process with only 8 animators and 53 processors to work with, while they eventually needed 33 animators and 300 processors to finish the movie. In addition, they had created a new technique that allowed to store sets and characters digitally, which made redrawing a character for every new scene a thing of the past. Even today, computer animation is being continuously developed further. The graphics get sleeker, animators are experimenting with extremely detailed shading effects, and new, fancy technologies are mixed into animated movies to make it look more like real life. An example of this is mocap, which uses sensors attached to people to track their movement and turn it into an ultra-realistic simulation, allowing for incredible real-world-like movement of characters in an animated world. And all of this wouldn't be possible due to the over 60 years of continuous experimentation and risk-taking by individuals and groups, who made the change possible from this to this. And while it might look like two completely separate ways of displaying a story, the philosophy behind creating an animation, no matter in what way, will always stay more or less the same. Or how the chief of Pixar said, "They're unbelievable tools, but they're really no different than a pencil and a piece of paper."